Our reporter Karinda Jagmohan has more for us from KwaZulu-Natal. Karinda, a good afternoon to you. I mean, just the most awful smash one can imagine. And one of the reasons for this is simply because there is not proper scholar transport in that area. Learners have no choice but to go to school by bakkie.
That's correct, Stephen. In fact, even the principal of one of the schools where 10 children had passed away, so 10 of the 18 children were from a particular school, he said he had even considered trying to pool money together to have the school purchase its own school bus, because at the moment parents were relying on unreliable transport to take their children from home to school and back. My colleague Lungelo Zungu will show you the area behind me. You'll see this is Pongola, a largely rural area, and in fact, according to Parliament, 70% of KwaZulu-Natal schools are situated in rural areas where many families live below the poverty line and cannot necessarily afford their own transport, especially for their children to head to schools. They're relying on taxis or other forms of public transport, or pooling their money together to have someone take their children to school. But in this case, it was a vehicle where children were piled in that were heading home from their various schools. The vehicle had been picking up several children, and everyone in that vehicle had passed away. The truck slamming into that vehicle, it had taken or overtaken a double barrier onto oncoming traffic, and you'll actually see that's part of the N2 now, where you'll see one truck coming through, and it's that truck slammed into that vehicle. The truck driver, 28-year-old Sibusiso Siyaya, appeared in court today. Unfortunately, we weren't able to take any visuals of him because he told the court that he was afraid of his own safety if people were to see his image. As a result, because he's not yet had proper legal representation, the court granted him that request up until his bail application, which will take place next week. Right now, he's formally charged with 21 cases of culpable homicide. Of course, at this point, we know that the death toll has been revised from before it was 19 children, now it's 18 children, because the department, or rather the KZN government, said that one body had been counted twice. But we have just been to the accident scene. It's nearby, and there's still school shoes on the ground where that crash had happened. And right now we're nearby one of the homes of the parents who had lost 3 children. She lost her eldest 10-year-old child and twins, both 7 years old. And she said she walked to that accident scene and she saw the body of her 10-year-old child. She said that he was sleeping, but she cannot forget the gruesome injuries that he had sustained in this crash. She blames the truck driver. At this point, community also blames negligent truck drivers who are driving recklessly on the N2 that goes straight through Pongola town, where you'll see their schools just lying next to the highway. You'll see right behind me that white building, that's a primary school. And opposite it, that's the N2 commercial highway, where trucks are driving right from the Durban harbour into Gauteng. This is the N2 highway that is connecting the country. So that is one other issue as well, negligence on the part of truck drivers and the lack of scholar transport. Going back to that issue, last year the KZN Department of Education said that while they were implementing their scholar transport policy, one that has been before the courts for several years because of delays with regards to that transport policy, they now say they don't have the budget to actually fully implement that policy. They said last year, the former MEC said that 1 billion rand would be needed to fully implement that, but he only had just over 360 million rand in funding. As a result, about 108,000 school pupils went without scholar transport last year. That means that in rural areas like Pongola, pupils living in the hills have to walk long distances to their schools and back, or have to rely on transport, whatever transport they can afford, or hopefully their school can pull together money and get a bus. But at this point, the issue here is the underdevelopment in rural communities, and now the consequences, deadly consequences it has on the people who live here.
Karinda, there's so many consequences of our society involved in this story. The fact that the highway goes literally through the center of Pongola to start. The fact that the primary school is right there, the fact that there's no scholar transport, the rural nature of that area of KwaZulu-Natal, most of that province. And then in the middle of all of that, Karinda, is the way that people drive. Truck drivers, we've all seen it, sometimes drive like that, but so do sedans, so do taxi drivers. There's another story here about the culture of our drivers.
That's correct. We are known, South Africa is known to have some of the most dangerous roads in the world. And we know that every day we see deadly accidents. In fact, earlier today there was a major crash on the R66 between Ulundi and Vryheid. That's about 2 hours away from us. Fortunately, there were no fatalities reported there, but you'll see video footage on social media showing several cars blowing up as they crashed into each other. And that is one road where we often see a number of fatal accidents. Last year, about 13 people died on in an accident there. We saw deaths in Drakensberg, where also there are dangerous roads and drivers that are driving recklessly. And here, of course, is one example where 19 children have died. So, of course, the core of this is the driving behavior of motorists, not just truck drivers, who in a number of interviews have spoken about being under pressure in terms of their delivery targets, having to drive along long roads, the lack of infrastructure at our ports and railways to even transport heavy cargo safely for industries, as opposed to on public roads where we have regular motorists. A range of issues when it comes to our roads, and of course the quality of roads itself. We know that, as we drive here, you wouldn't expect that this is a national highway. There are potholes here. In some cases, it's almost like a gravel area. One wouldn't think that this is the N2 highway. And then you speak about motorists itself. Even on the way here, we saw one bakkie that was overloaded, double its height, and you see that regularly on the roads, where you see vehicles that are not roadworthy. There has been a number of interventions by various government departments, but ultimately it is wholly the lack of infrastructure. Even I see right now kids being transported on a bakkie. My colleague Lungelo will show you. Those are school children that are being transported there, and they've just come off the N2 highway into this rural road where I presume they're probably going to be going home. Another example of just not having the proper services in place in areas that are away from your major cities, suburbs. This area of Pongola, it's largely an agricultural area, and so we're not seeing the proper development that it should have, that could perhaps not just safeguard its citizens but also build up this area to give back to the local economy. There are so many issues that stem from this one incident that has happened, that so many people are talking about, that ultimately leads to questions of how the national government, who controls the funds of the public, is reacting and actually assisting to give back to those who are taxpayers and those who cannot afford essentially to take care of themselves, that are then depending on that same pool of money.
Karinda, Jagmohan, thank you very much indeed for that live update from Pongola. Just amazing to see so soon after that horror crash. You start to see children still, of course. How else are they going to get to and from school but in the back of a bakkie? So many millions of children in the same situation around our country. In a moment.